that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God." Then, calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Let's pray. Lord, I ask that you would just guide Peter through his message today, and that you would speak to us one way or another, and that we would all just have a good day and a good service. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jessica. We'll give Jessica a hand for doing that. Okay. All right. So first of all, a couple things. We have TJF going every other Friday, and we're having a great time, and kids are coming, and it's exciting to see what God's doing there. And if any of you haven't had a chance to drop by and even hang out a little bit, I encourage you to do that, because then you kind of know what you're inviting kids to as well. But we always need volunteers to help with that, so I'm going to send the sign-up sheet around here, and there's blanks where you can fill it in. So we would love to have some folks. And even if you're just one of those persons who just goes, I have nothing to do with kids, I'm not a kid person. You can still come down and help us set up and help us put all the tables back there. So that would be awesome. And then we had our Belong and Believe Catalyst training a couple of weekends ago. And how many of you were there? Raise your hand if you were in our Belong and Believe. Awesome. So it was just a chance for us to discover together as a church, what is it that we believe? And then how do you become a part of this church community? And it was a morning, we had lunch. It was very, very good. I think everybody gained more than they probably thought they were going to by coming. And many of you weren't able to come on that Saturday, and you really want to come again. So we're going to do another one on February 15th. And so you can sign up on here as well. So if you consider this your church, I would really encourage you to come hang out with us, because it gets us kind of all on the same page, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start the clipboard this way, and it can work its way around, and feel free to sign up. All right. So we're on this journey through the Gospel of Mark. And if you have a Bible, you can open up to Mark chapter 8 today. And I wanted to start off with a video clip this morning. I know this about myself. You probably know, if you're really honest with yourself, you're probably there too. And then we look at people in the world, and we can kind of go, well, Christian, maybe not Christian. I don't even know where they're at. They're like all over the place. And it's never more so evident when we look at people in the public. People that are faces on TV and in movies and stuff like that. We can come to judgments and conclusions about them. And so you're going to see a video clip about Jim Carrey. And you may have all your kinds of thoughts and ideas about Jim Carrey, but we all know he's a comedian, he's hilarious, he's been in all these different movies. But he's been on a spiritual journey. And we're getting to see where he has arrived today. So go ahead, guys. Go big.
And I want to speak to the fact that I believe that this room is filled with God. And that you are heroes to me. And I admire you. Because when you step through these doors, you decide to be a part of this family, you've made a decision to transcend and to leave darkness behind. And it takes a champion to make that decision. And I really want to speak to the fact that I've had some challenges in the last couple of years myself. Ultimately, I believe that suffering leads to salvation. And in fact, it's the only way. That we have to somehow accept, not deny, but feel our suffering and feel our losses, and then we make one of two decisions. We either decide to go through the gate of resentment, which leads to vengeance, which leads to self-harm, which leads to harm to others, or we go through the gate of forgiveness, which leads to grace. your being here is an indication that you've made that decision already. You've made the decision to walk through the gate of forgiveness, to grace, just as Christ did on the cross. He suffered terribly, and he was broken by it to the point of doubt and a feeling of absolute abandonment, which all people felt. And then there was a decision to be made. The decision was to look upon the people who were causing that suffering, the situation that was causing that suffering, with compassion and with forgiveness. That's what opens the gates of heaven for all of us.
So, you need to know this about Jim Carrey. I mean, he's an artist, and some of you have probably seen a lot of his political paintings that he's done as of late. They get posted all over the place. And it's interesting, because here's this guy who is rich and famous and has everything. And yet, he in himself has realized that it didn't give him the life that he was looking for. And then he suffered tragedy in his life a few years ago that he was actually pointed to as possibly being the cause of that tragedy in another person's life. And it was tragic for him. And then you watch this journey that he's been on, and he's been looking for Jesus. And it's amazing to watch. And you know what he's trying to do now is he's in the process of doing portraits, paintings of Jesus. He's trying to understand the fullness of who Jesus is and try to instill it in a painting so that when people come in and see that painting, they experience Jesus. And I've watched a little video on that. He's struggling with that because you can't take Jesus and put him in a painting for the experience. But as an artist, that's how he knows to communicate. But I love it because he's creating all of these portraits, and you can look and you can see, oh, this is Jesus. And you can look at this portrait and see, oh, wait, no, this is Jesus. And this is Jesus as well. And so, I don't know if you've been experiencing this, but as we've been going through the Gospel of Mark, I'm going back through it again myself just to stand up here and share with you what God's sharing with me. And I felt like I've had a new encounter with who Jesus is in many ways myself. And I hope that that's been the experience for you, because I think as we begin to look at Jesus' life, there's just so much more there. There's so much more there. I mean, you think about it. When Jesus came, as we look at the very beginning of Mark, people were expecting him to look a certain way, and he did not live into what they expected. He was quite unexpected. He was talking about a kingdom, a life that was going to look very different than what they were hoping for, very unexpected, to the point that they didn't even know how to realize it. I've used these words over and over again, which I'm wrestling with in my own life. He spoke the unspeakable. He did the unthinkable. He touched the untouchable. He healed the unhealable. One of them that's just been standing out to me even today is a phrase I'm going to use. He invited the uninvitable. Think about that. He invited people to come into his life and follow him that the rest of the world would say, they're not the ones you invite. Jesus invited the uninvitable. And as he did that, people began to flock to him because he was touching people's lives. He was healing people's lives. He was redeeming people's lives. People were flocking to him in the thousands. Think about that. They didn't have social media. They didn't have TV. They didn't have cell phones. They had no way to communicate. His life was impacting people's lives so much that they were telling others and others, and it was just this crazy thing. Those people were being drawn to him. And it began to raise questions. People had to be questioning, who is this guy? We've had some faith healers occasionally. We've had some people who claim to be this guy. But who is this man? Really? Who is he? And as we talked about a few weeks ago, he turns and he's got his disciples who he's invited to follow him, and he sends them out to begin to do the very things he did. So now it's not only Jesus doing it, but the people who follow him, his disciples, are now doing the same things. And now he's got the attention of the religious people, the ones that are supposed to recognize who this Messiah is. And it begins to raise a lot of questions. And the questions are so great because their way of life is being threatened, because the way in which they've said you get to God, the way in which you are supposed to live according to God, doesn't look anything like what this guy's saying. And if this guy's right, and if this is true, it's going to rattle and wreck everything we've staked our whole lives in. So now they're beginning to ask questions. Last week, I told you that we were arriving at a place, and again, caught my attention as we've been going through Mark, that I think is the most pivotal question in the Bible, period. It is the question, and how you answer that question determines how you live into your concept of who Jesus is. Jesus asked his disciples this question. That's what Jessica started with. He said, who do you guys say I am? Who do you say I am? And I think how we answer that question determines the Jesus that we follow. It determines how big our Jesus is or how small our Jesus is. It determines the Jesus that we actually live out to as we live our life in the world each and every day. So let's take a look. We're going to kind of unpack this a little bit. So I'm kind of going back. We're in chapter 8. We're at verse 9 where Jesus asked that question, that big question. Who do you say I am? So, what's the answer to the question? Peter replies in verse 29. He says, you are the Messiah. But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about it. Wait, what? Peter gave the right answer. Bingo! Well, you need to know that back then, that word Messiah, in the Greek, the Christ, meant different things to different people. Okay, so there's basically two things that it meant based on what King David had said and what the prophets had said. David understood it to be that God would send a king. God would send a king, and that king would restore Judah to its prominence place, God's people, and then eliminate those that were oppressing them. And people put their hope in that. A king who's going to come, and he's going to eliminate all this bad stuff. We're going to have a real king and a real kingdom, and it's going to be the God one, and it's going to last forever. That was one thought. But then the prophet spoke of a different kind of kingdom. A different king. This king would be divine, and he would be human. He would be Emmanuel. He would be God with us. And then the kingdom that he would establish would be a new covenant. It would look completely different than the one that God had set up for his people to live into, that they had struggled with and failed with miserably. And then there was this other one that shows up in the Psalms, David's Songs. And it talked about a Savior that would come, that would experience long suffering. Long suffering. Be a suffering servant. A suffering servant. So when Peter says Messiah and says don't tell anybody, he's like, I think these guys think I'm the king that's going to come in and reestablish a kingdom. We're going to war. We're going to establish this. And Jesus very quickly says, okay, I know that you're probably thinking this. I don't want word out that I'm going to be that guy, because then it's going to stir up all kinds of political problems. That's not what I'm here for. In our Bibles, you notice they put headings in all the time? I wish they would put headings in because it tells you that there's a break in a new chapter. This conversation continues. This is why Jesus says what he says. So, Peter says you're the Messiah. Jesus says don't tell anybody. And now this is what Jesus does. He wants to clarify who he really is. Which Messiah is he? In verse 31, then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. And Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and then reprimanded Peter. Get away from me, Satan, he said. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not God's. Not God's. So think about this. And it had to be hard for Peter in that moment. Peter just gave an honest answer. And Jesus goes, this is who I am. I've already told you that I'm the Father's Son. And what you see in me is the Father. We're one and the same. So I am that divine and I am that human. And I am going to be that suffering servant. And Peter takes him aside and says, no, you're not. I want you to be this guy. And then Jesus says, get away from me, Satan. That's a huge rebuke, isn't it? I mean, imagine. But he's not saying that to Peter. He's saying it to the words that Peter said. He said it to the idea that Peter said. He was rebuking that idea that that's who he's supposed to be. And if you go back to the very beginning of Mark and in other Gospels, you see it. Jesus was already tempted with this. The enemy already came to him and said, you could be king. You could have everything. You could be overpowering of everyone. You'd have full authority. I'll give it all to you. And Jesus said, no. The Word of God says this. God's kingdom looks like this. It's not about power. It's not about possessions. It's not about position. So Jesus is rebuking with Peter that idea. And then we get to this point, which I think is probably one of the boldest statements, again, in the Bible. So we have this powerful question, and if you were going to underline the second thing in your Bible, this would be the second thing I'd challenge you to underline. I think it's the heart and center of our faith. Okay? And we have to look very carefully at it, because I think it tells us what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it means to be a disciple. Okay? What it really means. So we're at verse 34. So Jesus has his disciples, but I love the fact that he goes, I'm not just going to tell you guys. He gathers the crowd around him. He gathers everybody who's within earshot. I want you to come around here. Everybody's got to hear this. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways. Take up your cross and follow me. Crazy. Is that slide up there? That statement. Turn away from your selfish ways. Take up your cross and follow me. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Right from Jesus' mouth. If you want to be my follower, this is what it looks like. So there's some phrases in there I think we've got to unpack a little bit. First one is turn away from your selfish ways. Turn away from your selfish ways. In some translations, it says to deny yourself. In some translations, it says to disavow. You need to recognize that what Jesus is about other people. His kingdom is an other-centered life. I'm not going to live for myself. I'm going to live for others. Okay, I've mentioned this to you guys before in other moments, that I think the healthiest marriages are marriages where two people have entered into a covenant relationship together and they recognize the success of this marriage will be built on this. I sacrifice my life so you can live. And if the other person in the marriage says, I sacrifice my life so you can live, you got a healthy marriage. Marriage falls apart when people are about themselves. This isn't working for me anymore, so I need to go on to something that will work for me. I mean, that's just an example. Jesus is saying, you've built your life on all of these worldly ideas and things, and guess what? They're not working. In fact, you probably ask the question, how's it all working for you? Is it working? And he's saying, no, if you want to experience this life that I have for you, you need to actually turn, deny yourself, walk away from it to live into this new way of life. And it's all built around self. And we've been so culturized into it. Think about it. Our culture tells us to live for ourselves. And Jesus is saying a healthy kingdom doesn't work that way. It's when you live for other people. And it's when you live for other people you'll find yourself. I've been reading my devotional time. I'm in a place in the book of Acts, and I was reading about the Apostle Paul, who, by the way, talk about a faith journey. He used to be trying to kill Christians, and now he's planting churches. Crazy how Jesus redeems a life like that. But I was reading how he had taken a Nazirite vow, and at a certain point he shaved his head. I'm like, well, wait a minute, that kind of caught my attention. What's the deal with that? We need to know that taking the Nazirite vow meant that you were actually going to deny yourself something. Either some beliefs, some thoughts, some action. You were literally, I'm not going to do that anymore. And when I've conquered that, or I've reached the end of whatever I committed to, as a symbol that I've completed my vow, I'm going to shave my head. So this week, you're going to commit to a vow, and then next Sunday we're all... Joe already did it. Jesus is really telling the disciples, guys, to deny something means you really got to make a commitment to this. You've got to realize that we're going in this completely other direction. And the only way you're going to live into this life I'm talking about is you have to recognize that you got to turn and go a different way. And it's going to feel like it's upstream, maybe. At TGIF this last week, we were talking about being generous. And the memory verse that they had was 2 Corinthians 9:11. And actually, 2 Corinthians 9, I was looking at it. I mean, go back and reflect on that, man. There's a lot in there about in terms of what we're supposed to do with all that God has given us. But that verse says that you will be blessed generously, so that at every occasion you can be blessing to others. Think about that. That is way different than the world thinks, right? The world say, accumulate for me so my life can be comfy. And Paul's even saying right there, he's like, well, no. God's going to bless you so that you can be generous on all occasions. And that goes all the way back to in the Old Testament. Those of you who studied the Bible a lot, right? Abraham was said, I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing. That's counterculture right there. Just that one thing. Think about all the other stuff that we wrestle with on a daily basis. Then we have this bold statement, take up your cross. Now, you and I look back at the cross in hindsight. In some ways, the cross can be like, oh, that was awful that Jesus had to do it, but we can romanticize the cross. We wear them, we put them everywhere. But to the disciples in the crowd that are hearing this, think about this. They don't know that the cross is coming for Jesus. They don't know any of that yet. And Jesus is saying, take up your cross. And all they know is the Romans take people, humiliate them, and beat them, and it's a long-suffering death. So when Jesus says this to the disciples, he's saying, I want you to take that. Whoa. I don't know about you, that's pretty crazy. Like, you mean this kingdom means I'm going to have to die a brutal death? That's what we're talking about here? But that's not what Jesus is saying. I don't know if you're familiar with a pastor, Ray Stedman, amazing pastor years ago, and wrote many books, but he said this. I want to read something that he said about the cross. Many people think that a cross is any kind of trial or hardship you are going through, or any kind of handicap you must endure, like a mother-in-law, or a ding-a-ling neighbor, or a physical handicap. That's my cross, we say. But that is not what Jesus means. He himself had many handicaps, many difficulties and trials he endured before he came to his cross. So it's not merely handicap or difficulty or trial. The cross was something different. The cross stood for something in the life of Jesus, connected with shame and humiliation. It was a criminal's cross on which he was hung. It was a place of degradation where he was demeaned and debased. And so the cross stands forever as a symbol of those circumstances and events in our experience, which humble us, expose us, offend our pride, shame us, and reveal our basic evil. That evil which Jesus described earlier in Mark. Out of the heart of man comes evil thoughts, fornication, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. It is the cross which brings these out. Any circumstance, any incident which does this to us, Jesus says, if we are a disciple, we are to welcome. That is his meaning. Take up your cross, accept it, take glory in it, cling to it, because it is something good for you. It will reduce you to the place where you will be ready to receive the gift of grace that God has for you. That is why the cross is so valuable to us. It means recognizing in your life the things that are not working. And it's the stuff probably that we've been shaped into. We've built this life that we have, but there's a lot of it that's not working. And Jesus is saying, I want you to take that and I want you to die to it. Which means you have to recognize what those things are. And it's a slow death. So when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, I think what he's asking, and it's how I receive it in my own life, is this idea that I need to shoulder that cross as I live my life and recognize there's areas of my life I have to die to. I have to die to them. Because they're wrecking my life, and yet I cling to them. And I think the reason I cling to them is I'm so used to them. And I hope they'd be life-giving, but they continue to be there in my life. And they hinder my ability to follow Jesus because I'm dragging them along with me. And what God would want, what Jesus would want, he'd say, you know what, that thing you cling to, would you just die to it? Would you just leave it here? Crucify the thing. Get rid of it. It's wrecking your life. As I gathered our group up here this morning, we were just talking a little bit about the message today, and I gave them stickers with little construction trucks on them. We do stickers. If you ever volunteer on Sundays, you get a sticker. And the word that came to me today was this idea of deconstruction. I love how God does that. The word just came to me today. This idea of deconstruction. And I think that's what taking up the cross is. We have constructed this life for us. And if we want to follow Jesus, we have to allow him to deconstruct the life that we've established so he can construct a new one. It's a life of deconstruction. It literally is. Some of you guys are contractors and you get what it means. Sometimes you got to tear the whole thing down so you can rebuild it back up, right? Am I right on that, Mike? You got to do that sometimes? You've done that a few times, I'm sure. And sometimes a lot of the experiences we've had have brought us to a place where we recognize that just has to happen. That just has to happen. Then Jesus throws out these words. Follow me. Follow me. Follow me. Huge words. Let me read a little further into this because there's a word that stood out to me that kind of helped me with this phrase myself this week. So, he says these words, follow me. And then after that, verse 35 says, if you try to hang on to your life, you'll lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is there anything worth more than your soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in the glory of his Father. So the word that jumped out there to me was ashamed. Now, I think some of us, again, from bad theology maybe in terms of the way we've been looking at God and who we are, like if I don't do right, then God's mad at me, disappointed in me, therefore he's ashamed of me. And that's not really what that word is meaning there. It comes from the Greek word suke. And if you actually look at the spelling, it looks like psych, like psychology. Suke. And listen to what that word means. And again, our language picks simple ways with one word to try to define something. But in Greek and Hebrew and stuff, there's lots of words that paint a picture of a word. So this is what shame means. Guilt or embarrassment because of one's actions, characteristics, or associations. Sorrow, guilt, conscience-stricken, remorseful, regretful, rueful, apologetic, hesitant, unwilling, afraid. I think when Jesus said this to the disciples, this was going to be like a huge Kairos moment that I've talked with you guys about. Kairos moment is where God just like, boom, I'm going to put this right in front of you. What are you going to do with it? What Jesus is saying, many of you are going to try to live the life I'm inviting into and at the same time continue to live this life in the other world. And it's going to put you in a situation where in a sense the enemy can use it to say, guess what? You're claiming this, but you're living that. You're claiming this and you're living that. You're claiming this and you're living that. And then you become ashamed. You've lived a double life in a sense. Jesus said you can't serve two masters. You're going to love one and you're going to hate the other one. And as a follower of Jesus through the years, I found myself doing that so much, where I'm trying to live the Jesus way, but I still live in the world way. And then that just becomes this burden, and then you start to lose your focus. And why am I even following Jesus? Because it's just not, you can't live in both worlds. You can't live in both worlds. I think what many of us do is we live our life, and when Jesus comes into it, we just add Jesus to our life. I'm going to continue to live the life that I've built for myself, and I'm just adding Jesus to it because there's some good things, like forgiveness and grace. And I get fire insurance so I can go to heaven. That's all I need. And what Jesus is saying, no. If you're going to follow me, you're going to leave everything behind, you're going to follow me, and you're going to build your world around that. And that is quite different. And if you're honest with yourself, you struggle with that on a daily basis. Because we live in this world, and we're in the system. We work to earn money, to pay our bills, to live in the house, to buy the clothes, think about everything we do every day. What's at the center of it? Is Jesus at the center of it? Or is the world at the center of it? We're trying to get Jesus to fit into it. And it's incredibly freeing when you make the flip. And it doesn't mean you make a full-on flip. It means just say, all right, Jesus, there's more to this, and I'm going to start walking that way, and I'm going to carry my cross, and I'm going to do that slow thing. I'm going to die to some things. Just take me down this road, and I'm open to dying to some things that you really have better view for my life. You know better for me, and I'm going to die to those things. So Jesus goes on here. I'm going to end right here. Go to chapter 9. This is a crazy moment. Again, I hate chapters and I hate headings because they wreck the moment. So Jesus says this to them, right? that the person will return in the glory of his Father and holy angels. So again, he's trying to make the disciples know, this is who I am, and the people around him. Verse 1, Jesus went on to say, I tell you the truth, some of you standing here right now will not die before they see the kingdom arrive in great power. Now, those of you who study the Bible a lot, and I know a lot of you just went through Revelation, you're like, well, yeah, when Jesus comes back. But I want you to see what happens literally in the next moment. So some of you are going to not die. You're going to get to see this. If you keep following me, you're going to get to see this. Verse 2, 6 days later. So how many people are still following him? Jesus takes Peter, James, and John and leads them up a mountain high to be alone. And as the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. And then Elijah and Moses appeared and began talking with Jesus. And if there was any doubt in the disciples' minds that this kingdom and this person, Jesus, is way different than what we expected, there's that moment, because all of a sudden, whoa, he's not like us completely. There's something different about this Jesus. So I just want to leave you with this reflection point for today. I think it's a big question. Who do you say I am? And then if you want to follow Jesus, you need to turn from your selfish ways. You need to take up your cross and follow him. So if he is who he is, are we willing to do those three things? And you're not perfect. You're not going to do it perfectly. That's why Jesus said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you live that way. And it's in that you're going to find life. It's in that you're going to find life. Do you want to follow Jesus? All you have to do is say, I want to follow Jesus, and I'm just going to do it the best that I can. Paul said these amazing words. He said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. Now, he's in jail when he writes that, and he's literally writing a literal statement like, if I die in this right now, I know where I'm going. But when I read it for me today, I go, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. I want to live for Jesus today, and the things I die to are going to make my life even better. Amen. So why don't we close our eyes, just reflect, what did the Lord say to you this morning? So we're going to take communion this morning. And it's symbolic, right? Just in light of what we talked about. Jesus gathered his disciples together. He kind of restates what he said was going to happen. Paul says when he gathered his disciples together, including the guy who's going to betray him, he took bread and he broke it. And said, this is my body broken for you. Take and eat and do this in remembrance of me. And then he took the cup of wine at the table, which was a common thing. And he said, this cup represents a new covenant, a new kingdom, a new way of life. It's going to look different. So much so, I'm going to sacrifice my life. My blood is going to be poured out for the forgiveness of sins. This represents a new covenant, a new way of life for you. Take and drink. Do this in remembrance of me. And Paul kind of followed that up and said, until Christ returns. So as we take communion this morning, don't feel like you need to come up right away. Maybe you can even take the moment. Part of the practice of communion is even having a moment to reflect. Christ died so that you can live. Maybe you could reflect on something you need to die to so that you can find life in Christ. So I've asked some people to come on up and help serve communion today. And so the way we do this here, when you come up, after you've had time of reflection, you can just come up and break off a piece of bread, and they're going to say the body of Christ broken for you. And then you can dip it in the cup, and when you dip it in the cup, they will say the blood of Christ shed for you. So the body of Christ broken for you, and the blood of Christ shed for you. And today, when you come up, you can just, after you've done that, you can just eat it yourself. We'll sing through that time. But please feel free if you need some reflective time. Don't feel like you have to come up right away. Amen. So let me pray, and then we'll take communion together. Lord, I want to thank you for the gift of your Son. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the life that he lived. Thank you for the life that he gave. Thank you for the life that he continues to live through each one of us. We thank you for these reminders at the table of the bread and the cup, his body broken and his blood shed for us. May that moment this morning be a Kairos moment for us that compels us to take up our cross and follow you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So you can come up whenever you're ready. I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died. My riches gain, I count but loss. as we are a church community together, we give generously so that God can continue to do his work through us. He's blessed us with all that we need to do his work. The question is, will we release to him? But if you are visiting with us and you don't consider this your church home, please don't feel compelled to give unless God puts it on your heart. And if you filled out a connection card today, signed up for a growth group, you can drop it in the plate. Ed?
Please pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. You are so amazing. You are King of Kings. We thank you for all of your trust, Lord. We thank you for the love for each and every one of us in this room. Heavenly Father, we just ask for your direction. You are the way, the truth, and the life. So help us figure out how to serve you, Lord, and how to serve others. And in doing so, we know we will find ourselves. So please accept this offering this morning in your honor, Lord. In the precious and holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
What a powerful message this morning. It's amazing that our Sunday school class this morning was exactly on the same topic. One of the things that we discussed was self-denial and denying ourselves, and it's two totally different things. Ken and I were talking about our A1C and blood sugar, Self-denial is denying sugar and sweets and stuff to keep our blood sugar down. Denying ourselves is putting God first and following him. So how do we follow God? One thing is learning more about him. And how do we do that? Through Scripture, listening to messages that, like Peter presented this morning, talking to our brothers and sisters about the Lord, and going out in creation and just looking at what God has created. Because everything out there, look at the design, it all points back to the designer. So it's not self-centered, it's other-centered. And Tilly and I have been so blessed the last few months with her health problems in the fall, and we received so much of an outpouring of people being not self-centered, but other-centered, bringing us food and prayers and flowers and so many things that, you know, it's other-centered. So this week, my challenge to you is to go out and, you know, God has such great compassion and love for us. Go out and share that with others this week. In Jesus' name.
Amen. So remember, Super Bowl party at Clint Susan's house. Address is in the bulletin. The more people there are, the better the party. And then there's a party going on back there. You can hear it. I hear the